friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Sunny Studios' Fabulous Flamingos and Tropical Scenes. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Sunny Studios Summer Splash 6x6. So I'm going to pull out the inspiration piece and tuck that behind my cardstock panel so I can choose my color palette based on that. I'll be using my Copic markers today, and I'm going to start with the flamingos. The closest match to the flamingos on the pattern paper that I could find in my Copic collection was RV02, RV04, and RV06. So I'm starting with that RV06 on this first flamingo. And my marker was a little bit leaky, so I took off the second cap to equalize the pressure inside the barrel. And then I'm going to just continue coloring using the RV04 for the mid-tone and then the RV02 for the highlight. I'm just concentrating on the body for now. And then for the other flamingo, I'm going to color this one the same, except I'm going to reverse my light source on the body. The head is also faced toward the right, so I'm going to put my shadows on the back of the head for that. And then the rest of the body is facing toward the left, so I'll put my shadows accordingly. I did accidentally start with the RV04, so I just went back in with that RV06 and then blended back out with the RV04. And now I'm taking that RV02 and just filling in any remaining white space. And I am going to do a second layer on these guys to just beef up that saturation, make them a little bit brighter, and also make the blend a little bit smoother. And since this video was on the shorter side, I decided to leave it in the video. I know a lot of times you guys like to see that transformation that the second layer provides. So I'm just going to quickly go over what I have already done, with the exception of when I do the second layer of the lightest shade. I often do not take that completely over the first layer, just to leave a little bit of an extra highlight, especially on the face, since that area is a larger space with more room to leave a highlight. Then for the wing, I wanted to go a little bit darker, just like the flamingos in that pattern paper. Their wings are also a shade darker. So I'm going to bring in RV09 for that. I'm going to outline the wing, and I'm also going to draw in a few extra little scallops there to indicate some feathers. And then I'm going to blend that out with the RV06. And then I'll fill in with the RV04 as my lightest shade. And just like I did with the rest of their bodies, I am also going to do a second layer on those wings to just really make them stand out. And especially those little scallops that I drew in, I really wanted to have those be a bit more prominent. So adding that second layer is just going to increase the saturation on that and make them stand out. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to keep the RV04. That's going to become my darkest now. I'll bring in RV00 and RV02, and I'm going to do the flowers. And again, I accidentally started with the RV02. I just picked up the wrong marker. So I'm going to go back in with the RV04, and that's the brightness that I was looking for. I'm going to put that the closest to the center, and then blend out with a few strokes of that RV02. And again, my RV02 was looking like it might be a little leaky. I just did marker maintenance the other night and refilled all of my Copics, so some of them are on the really full side. And then I just blended that out with the RV00. And then for the plumeria, I'm just going to add the RV04 on one side, and then blend out with the other two shades. I wanted to add some rosy cheeks to my flamingos, but since they're already pink, I knew I needed to do something that was a little bit of a contrast, so I pulled in some more peachy pinks with RV11 and RV20 for that. And then to match the yellow legs in the pattern paper, I'm going to use Y02, Y06, and Y08. I don't use these yellows as often because they're a little bit more of like a pure yellow, whereas like the Y13, 15, and 17 that I usually prefer have a bit more of like an orangey tone to them. But this matched the pattern paper so much better, and I do like these more pure yellows for certain things. I'm going to do the centers of the flowers with these shades as well. And then for their beaks, I'm just going to add in a touch of N0 down at the bottom to place a little bit of shadow on that white portion. Then I'm going to start coloring in my leaves, and I'm trying to bring in those really bright yellow greens that are in that pattern paper. And the combo that is the closest that I could come is YG21, YG23, and YG25. So I'm going to do these 3 small leaves with that combo. And I did not do a complete second layer on these leaves, but I often do like to go back in with a little bit of just the darkest shade and place that in the crease just to intensify that area where the line is drawn. Then I'm going to switch yellows to something that is similar but a little bit more cool toned. I'm using YG11, YG13, and YG17, and I'll do the 2 broader leaves, more like Monstera leaves. And yeah, I wanted to pull in something that would keep in the same tone as the previous greens but still stand out. I didn't want all my leaves to look exactly the same, but since we have that aqua background in that pattern paper, I thought going with a little bit more of a blue toned green would be complementary. So I'm just placing that YG17 down the center, blending out with the YG13, and then using the YG11 on the outer edges. And I did do 2 full layers on these leaves just because the saturation level wasn't where I wanted it to be. I didn't want to get too bold by bringing in an extra dark marker because the pattern paper is pretty pastel. So I wanted to keep the colors a little bit more muted, even though they are vibrant shades, especially those hot pinks. But so yeah, I just added in that second layer, which is going to increase that depth just a little bit, which will help those leaves to stand out a bit more. And like I said, I did a whole second layer on these because I wanted that blend to be nice and smooth. For my last 2 leaves, I'm going to go even more blue toned with the G12, G14, and G16. So that G16 really has a lot of blue undertone in it, but then the G14 is a bit warmer, and the G12 is just super pale. So I think it's a good match for that pattern paper. It's not a color that's reflected in it, but I think it still complements it quite nicely. So I'm just starting at the center of each of those skinny leaves with that darkest shade, the G16, and then blending out about another third of the way with the G14, and then the last third is going to get the G12. And then just like with the small green leaves, I did add a second layer of just the darkest shade. And then I'm going to use the same greens on the other leaf, even though it's a completely different style. I didn't want to introduce too many extra greens into the color palette, so I just wanted to use these once again, just the 3 different green combos. So I'm using the very tip of my marker to get in those skinny little leaves, and I'm just coloring that in very carefully, adding the G16 on the base of each of those little spiky leaves, and then blending out the same way as the one above, about a third each of each of those shades down the length of those leaves. And then a little bit of the extra G16 and G14 in the center. For that sandbar up above, or the island, I'm going to use some E50 shades. I really like E50s for sand. I think they have the perfect tone with it has that golden brown, just reminds me of the beach. So I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53. I'm bringing in the E53 on the edges, and then I'll blend that out with the E51, just making sure that I catch the edge of that E53 and pull it into this middle part. And then for the very center, I'll add in the E50 and just make sure that that is nicely blended. Then I'll take a white gel pen and go over the catch light in that one flamingo's eye to make that nice and white, and then I'll trim these images out with their matching dyes. Then I'll go back to that Summer Splash 6x6 pad and choose a couple more prints to match with that initial inspiration piece. And just using my scraps here because I thought that those would work perfectly. Then I'm going to take a piece of white cardstock and trim that down with the Fancy Frames rectangles from Sunny Studio. I'm using the smaller of those two scallop dies and only the outer portion of that frame. And I cut down that blue wave piece to fit behind. For my sentiment, I'm going to stamp out "Your Flamazing" on the scrap that is left over from die cutting that frame, and I'm doing that in Lawn Fawn Plastic Flamingo ink. And then I'm also going to do an insert for the inside of my card, and I'm going to continue stamping in that same ink, and I'll do another flamingo and that little leaf and the sentiment "Stand Tall," which I think can go for lots of different occasions or just an encouragement for somebody. So I'll set that aside, and in the meantime I have added some 1/8 of an inch score tape to the back of that white scalloped frame. So I'm just going to carefully peel off those release papers. The 1/8 of an inch fits perfectly behind that frame without overlapping any of those scallops. So once I have that all peeled off, I'm just going to line that up over that blue wave print, which is going to become my background. So super easy to create a background using pattern paper like that. And I'll just press that down into place. The rest of the pattern papers I trimmed down with my paper trimmer, and I'm actually going to use the reverse side of that flamingo paper as the main piece on this card front, because if I had used the full flamingo piece, I think it would have gotten a bit busy with all of the images as well. So instead I'm just going to use a smaller strip of that. I'm placing the green leafy print, which will tie into all of the leaves, a little bit shifted over toward the left-hand side, and then I'll run that flamingo print horizontally a little bit low of center. Then I'll take that focal panel and pop that up with some foam tape right in the very center of the card. So I'm just going to make sure that I am centered there, making sure I have the same amount of space on all 4 sides, and then I'll press that down into place and bring in my images. Before I add those, I'm also going to add the insert. I just trimmed that down to be 4 by 5 1/4, so it fits perfectly inside my card with just a 1/4 of an inch border all around. And then I'm going to add in my sentiment next, because I need to get that right for the rest of the spacing of the scene. I'm adding a small piece of foam tape to the edge that's going to hang over the frame, and then liquid glue for the rest of that. And I trim that down using the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment banners. Now I can start adding in my images, starting with that island. I'm going to place that right down in front, just kind of floating in the water there, or rather just obviously islands don't float, but the water is kind of lapping up all around it, creating like a little sandbar. Then I'll take the lady flamingo. I mean, it can be whatever you want, but I'm just imagining that this is the lady. and place her next to that sentiment banner. And I'll take the guy flamingo and place him almost like he's whispering those words of encouragement to her. So he's kind of just right there next to her head. And then I'm going to start placing some of these leaves down in both the left and right corners to kind of fill in some of that space. And I'm going to create a little bit of a different look. Normally I do go really symmetrical on both sides, but I'm actually going to build up the right side a little bit thicker with the foliage since the green pattern paper is shifted toward the left side of the card. I wanted to balance that out by adding more foliage over on the right side of the card. So initially it's balanced. I have 2 of the larger darker green clusters and then 2 of the medium green leaves. I'm also going to place 2 of the small green leaves, and then I will start to create that little bit off balance. I'm going to put the larger flower over on the right hand side. I'll place the smaller flower that looks almost identical over on the left. And then I'm going to place the extra green leaf and that extra plumeria flower over on the right. So I'm just shifting things while it's still wet and I can still move things around, and then adding those other 2 images there. And I think that balances out the card really nicely because it adds the extra weight over on the right hand side. I wanted to fill in some of the empty space on the blue water background, so I added a couple of sequins that'll also bring in some extra shine. And then of course I have to add in some of my favorite embellishments, Stardust Stickles. I put that on the center of the 2 flowers and then on the edges of the plumeria. And I'm also going to outline the little sections of the wings that I drew in, just really carefully using a thin amount of that stickles so it doesn't get lost. And then I will also fill in the centers of those sequins with a little dot for some extra sparkle. And that is going to finish this card off. I think it turned out so bright and summery and just really fresh and fun. There's another peek at the inside. If you guys enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. And I would so appreciate you subscribing if you haven't already done so. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much for watching, spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.